Artificial intelligence is the opportunity of our generation, but it is an existential threat. And to be an opportunity of our generation, it must be available to all countries of the world and to all areas of the world population. And it is possible to do it, but we need to have a global platform where everybody can come together. Artificial intelligence will be the central element of change in the world in the near future.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to a special GZERO presentation. This event is part of our Global Stage series produced in partnership with Microsoft. I'm Tony Maciulis, Chief Content Officer at GZERO Media. We're coming to you today from inside the United Nations headquarters in New York as the 10th Annual Forum on Science, Technology, and Innovation gets underway. This gathering focuses on the ways in which technology can be used to promote more inclusive economic growth, to scale health and science breakthroughs, and to attain greater gender equality among many other global goals. And this week there are leaders from government, private sector, research, all here sharing ideas on all those themes and ways to collaborate on solutions, even in this very challenging geopolitical moment. I'd like to introduce this rockstar panel we have here. I'm joined by Jeffrey Ding, Assistant Professor of Political Science at George Washington University, author of Technology and the Rise of Great Powers. It's a book that's exploded in these circles and beyond. Lucia Velasco is the AI Policy Lead for the United Nations Office for Digital and Emerging Technologies. Dr. Juan Lavista Ferres is Microsoft's Chief Data Scientist, Corporate Vice President as well, and Lab Director for AI for Good Lab, also an author. We're going to talk about your book too. And Caitlin Dean serves as Director and Deputy Head of Corporate at Eurasia Group and is one of my colleagues. Welcome to you all. Good to see you. And Lucia, we're here inside the UN, so I want to start with you. 10th STI Forum happening right now. A lot has changed since 2015. We just heard from the UN Secretary General about both the promise and peril of AI. How do you view it in terms of how it's changing the game in this conversation?
Well, thanks for having me. Obviously, we are seeing in every conversation that AI is a central topic, and that speaks a lot to the moment we're in. We're also seeing how the institution itself here at the UN and other institutions are rethinking themselves to make sure they're fit for purpose. And in that sense, the UN has been pushing the accelerator and making sure that it had an office dedicated to digital and emerging technologies where I work at, but also we're in the middle of an intergovernmental process to create the first two global mechanisms to actually cooperate in the governance of that technology. And that's the first step to make sure the opportunities are there for everyone.
And Juan, for that opportunity to be there for everyone, it implies inclusion. And in my mind, AI is pretty high up the food chain in terms of technology when we talk about the building blocks. Why don't you talk a little bit about where we're at in terms of bringing everybody into the digital economy?
Yeah, I think AI in some ways helping a lot on bridging that gap for those people that have access to AI. Interacting with a computer has become easier, correct? So we never thought that we would get hundreds of millions of people using AI a couple of years ago. Now suddenly we have more than 500 million people using AI almost on a weekly basis. At the same time, we need to understand that on one side it's becoming easier, but on the other side the gap is increasing because you still have people, still have, even 150 years after we had electricity here in New York City, we have 800 million people that do not have access to electricity, and that's the first block. The second block is, well, from those people that, like, you still need to actually, if you have electricity, you still actually need to have access to computers, and then for those people that actually have access to computers, you need to have access to connectivity, like access to the internet. Once you go through the whole funnel, you also need an AI model that speaks your language, correct? And that's something that there are certain languages like English, Spanish, Mandarin, and a few more where you have enough content to have trained these models. But once you go, there are languages like if you speak Guarani in South America, well, you don't have access to a large language model today. Once you revisit the whole funnel, you have over half, likely around half of the world that do not have access to this technology. And I think that it's important for us to recognize, whenever we're thinking about AI and potential AI, we cannot forget that we still have that problem, that debt, basically, that we need to pay.
Yeah, and to your point about niche languages, I mean, I think it's learning very quickly, right? And those things are being added quickly, but you still have to have the connectivity to be able to and the skills to be able to use it, correct?
Correct. Like I think the language barrier, I think, is going to be easier to solve. We have seen in the last few years these large language models becoming like much easier to train new languages, and I think that's a problem that I believe we can solve. Connectivity is not that easy to solve. Electricity is definitely not that easy to solve.
And so, Jeff, we're talking about inclusion. Your book really talks about diffusion and the power of having a lot of people uptake and take advantage of technology in a society, and how, in a way, that can even rival invention when it comes to creation of these tools. Why don't you explain a little bit about the theory behind the book?
Yeah, I think in most of our conversations about geopolitical competition in artificial intelligence, we focus on that initial eureka moment, that moment of invention. Innovation is when the invention is first commercialized or pioneered. And so most of the headlines go to what's the latest, greatest breakthrough that comes out of OpenAI or Anthropic or China's DeepSeek. But the book argues when you look at all these past technological revolutions, and if AI is as transformative as we all think it could be, that might be the right comparison point. When you look at all these past industrial revolutions, the country that benefits the most is actually the one that's able to diffuse and spread and adopt general purpose technologies at scale throughout all different application sectors. And I think that's at the promise of something like AI. Diffusion, put simply, is just the spread of a technology across a population of potential users. The promise of AI is the population of potential users is the entire economy. And that's where diffusion meets inclusion.
Now, Juan was saying about 500 million people are using AI on a regular basis during the week. That doesn't sound terribly diffuse on a planet of 8 billion people. So where are we at on this continuum, and who's leading?
I think Juan is exactly right. It still has not spread that far. And even that 500 million number, if you dig into it, maybe some of those people are using ChatGPT once or twice, or they're using it just for fun rather than it being integrated into a productive process where it becomes part of a company's workflow. So for me, when you look back at the past, the general pattern for general purpose technologies is they take multiple decades to diffuse throughout the economy, even in the very quickest adopting country.
Yeah,
so,
Go ahead. Yeah.
I think we need to, like, yes, 500 million might not be that much today when you look at an 8 billion people population, but from a general purpose technology, it has been by far, by orders of magnitude, the fastest that we have seen, correct? So I was looking at the numbers and talking to Jeffrey, like it took, so in the US got to 70% electricity in 1930, India got to 70% electricity in 2010. Correct? So I think it's important for us to say, hey, this is moving much faster than we ever seen. Like printing press likely took 200 years to get adopted in a lot of countries. So I think, yes, we're not there yet on a global level, but it's moving at a speed we haven't seen. Like even compared to the internet adoption, like the AI adoption, and like it is moving in an amazing speed, and that's why it has taken a lot of the discussions because of the growth that all countries are seeing.
Caitlin, let's talk about the private sector. So this is a fraught moment in general, right? Geopolitically, obviously there's the tariff battles. There were a number of other crises impacting corporates before today. But how does AI factor into this, and how are the companies you're talking to considering it right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a widespread acknowledgement and understanding that this is going to be something that almost every company is going to be using at some point in the very near future. But for now, we see pretty much 3 different tiers of ways that companies are incorporating AI into what they do. So at the sort of most intense level, you have large tech companies who this is becoming part of what they do. This is becoming one of their core capabilities. They're offering new capabilities that they weren't able to offer before, and they're using AI to enhance the capabilities that they've already been offering before. Then we see sort of the next layer is a set of early adopter corporates. And these are really the ones that have sort of the scale and are able to incorporate AI into their business strategy. So it's not fundamentally changing what they do, but it's enabling them to serve different groups of people or serve different geographies or improve fundamentally how they're serving their customers. And then at the sort of more diffuse level, and this is where we see most of the clients we're working with so far, is those who are not able to use it for their core capabilities or for their core strategy, but they are able to use it to enhance their productivity, to be able to do more things more quickly. As of yet, not necessarily to replace people, but to make the people that they have a lot more efficient. Most of these companies are using sort of turnkey solutions from a large tech provider like Microsoft. And so they don't really yet have a strategy around it, but it's becoming more and more part of what they do every day and part of their planning for the future. And
is there a sense that it's part of the geopolitical conversation in the way that tariff battles are? Are they looking at what governments are doing in terms of AI?
I think in a lot of ways, a lot of the clients we see would like there to be a bit more of a global structure or global agreement, because there are real risks for corporations and for any organization that wants to use these. I mean, you have operational risks. So at the most fundamental, the LLMs still have hallucinations. You can't necessarily trust that what you're using for your business is going to be 100% correct. You basically have to treat it like a junior staffer or an intern. It provides some good output. You can train it, you can make it better, but you can't rely on it 100%. You also have some legal risk because there is really not yet a full legal structure. So they're sort of walking blind and hoping that for now things work out well. And then there are real reputational risks for companies, not only that they would have AI used against them, but that some of what they do with AI, if not used properly, could really hurt them on sort of the more global stage. But I don't think that for most companies, they're not really making the connection now between the geopolitical risks. I think governments are well aware of both sort of the economic and the security risks of AI. Corporations are thinking about it in terms of their own security risks, but not necessarily making that link.
Mm-hmm. And this forum is obviously very much about how technology can advance the UN Sustainable Development Goals. That's actually the subject of the first question that we asked our followers. GZERO presented a series of poll questions to our more than 6 million followers across our social media channels, all related to the themes we're discussing today. The first one pertains directly to how AI can be used for impact. We asked, in the next 5 years, where do you think AI will make the biggest impact? In healthcare, education, jobs, or climate and environment? Let's look at the results. Well, jobs clearly the winner at 48%, but not too far behind healthcare, education, and then climate and environment. Juan, this is a big focus of your book, AI for Good. And I'm wondering if you can give us a couple of specific examples where AI is already making a difference, particularly in something like healthcare or education.
One of the examples I have in the book that I think is one of my favorite projects is related to something called retinopathy of prematurity. So retinopathy of prematurity is the leading cause of blindness in the world and affects very small premature babies, and it's a disease that didn't exist a few decades ago, and now we're suddenly seeing a huge increase across the entire world. And the reason this didn't exist a few decades ago and now we're seeing a huge increase is because it affects very small premature babies, and these babies wouldn't survive before. Now, more and more of these babies, because of improvements in health and healthcare in general, more and more of these babies are surviving. The challenge the world has is that we only have 200,000 ophthalmologists. And even if these 200,000, from these 200,000 ophthalmologists, only 10,000 of them are pediatric ophthalmologists. If we distribute them perfectly equally around the world and they only dedicate 100% of their time to diagnose this disease, it would be physically impossible for them to diagnose every case. We have AI models today that can diagnose this from your smartphone. And this is hopefully going to change the way doctors work, allowing them to diagnose this disease. Because if you can diagnose the disease, treating this disease is relatively easy. The challenge is diagnostics. This is just one example where AI is not just the solution, but it's the only solution we have, correct? I think there's many more. We need to understand that half of the world, like 4 billion people in the world, do not have access to health or healthcare. I think that the technology has shown that it has the ability, not going to replace doctors, but it's going to empower these doctors and making them much more productive in many ways. And I do think that this is just one example on as relates to SDG. But when I look at the list of SDGs, AI has the possibility to affect almost all of them and hopefully improve. So.
But only if it's done at scale, right? And so when you talk about these specific examples, and we're talking about how technology can advance something like reducing poverty or hunger, it seems to me like that's going to take a lot of stakeholders, right? Maybe Lucia, comment on the approach that would take and require.
Yeah, I try to move away from this techno-solutionist approach where we say broadly that AI is going to solve many problems. I think it's going to contribute, but only if we're able to have the foundations set in every economy in the world, so they can develop their own solutions, they can develop their own products tailored to the context, because that's very relevant. It's not the same a solution thought of in the US that one in any country of Africa, because the circumstances are different. So when we look at the AI economy, because I think that we've moved from the digital economy to the AI economy, where AI is the driver of growth and will be more and more. We need to first include, obviously, the globality, the world, but also the stakeholders involved in the technology. This is not something that governments can look at it in an isolated way. It needs to come with the companies, with civil society, and with academia.
Mm-hmm. Let's take a look at another poll result. So here's another question that we posed. What's the biggest barrier to inclusive AI adoption? Lack of digital access, inadequate skilling, bias in creation of AI tools, and policy gaps. So inadequate skilling, 36%. Jeff, so we're talking about inclusion, and we're talking about governance. But then the next step really is, how do we get more people in the population to know how to use it properly, right?
Yeah, I think for me, when I looked back at these past historical cases, I think initially I thought, the determining factor for which country is going to best take advantage of AI would be who's spending the most in cutting edge R&D, who's training the best and the brightest, who's able to prevent cutting edge innovations from leaking out to other countries. But actually, what came up was, maybe I should have polled the audience before researching the book.
5,000 of our followers.
Yeah, what came up, the biggest bottleneck was on the skilling side, but it was skilling in terms of, are you able as a country to develop education and training institutions to broaden the base of engineering skills associated with the general purpose technology? So you have the steam engine, and then you have the rise of a discipline of mechanical engineering. You have electricity, the prototypical general purpose technology, and then you have the rise of a discipline of electrical engineering. Computer science, it doesn't have the word engineering in its title, it's very much an engineering-oriented discipline. I think a big question is what are the engineering skills that will be systematized and standardized with AI? And actually going back to Caitlin's point, the transition from going to just adopting AI as a turnkey solution to now integrating AI into your company's core workflow, sometimes that'll require having a team of AI engineers. And so That to me is the biggest thing, how to develop this broader pool of human capital to diffuse this technology at scale.
If I can say something, because I believe that with this particular technology, with generative AI or GPI, is that paradigm where you needed to have a very core function of your company with deep knowledge of the technology is changing, and it requires less investments, and I believe that is going to be one of the drivers of adoption. That is less difficult to adopt, it has less barriers, and even though you don't use a turnkey solution, but you can use an open source model, or you can adapt it to your needs. I don't think that necessarily you need to have a core team of engineers that know about the technology.
I would actually, for me, I'm thinking of a certain type of skills that we'll need that's sort of in between the two. That, especially for businesses, we're going to need strategists and managers and business leaders who aren't necessarily engineers, but who have such a solid understanding of the technology that they are able to envision how it can help them going forward. Not just how can we use these solutions that are very accessible, that I think a lot of the, ChatGPT is the sort of very obvious one, but there are a lot of things that individuals can use without much training at all. But I think in order to take the full potential, to really use the full potential of it in a business, we're going to need to see, or any organization, we're going to need to have leaders who really understand enough of how it works to be able to really take advantage of it. And I think it's a similar issue, I don't know, Tony, if you wanted to get into this, but it's a similar issue for governments.
Really?
We're going to not only how to adopt it, but in order to regulate AI, we're going to need policymakers, both at national levels and international levels, who have the knowledge to be able to think ahead well enough to regulate it, so that we're not just chasing after what the companies are doing.
I would add, because I've been a policymaker and I've been in a government actually regulating AI and creating the institutions to accompany that regulation, that you need to use the technology. It's very difficult to think about a technology, even if you have the vision, if you don't use it daily, it's very difficult that you will come up with something that is valuable.
Yeah, that actually is a nice segue into our next question, and then I can do a follow-up on that. So the poll question is, who should lead in setting rules for regulation of AI? Choices were the United Nations, governments, tech companies, or public-private coalitions. Let's show the results. 42% said the United Nations, followed by governments, 32%. Tech companies, 4%. I'm actually not that surprised by that. Public-private coalitions, 22%. I'm kind of guessing, even though it's not, first of all, congratulations to you, the UN coming out on top. But I'm kind of guessing it is going to be some kind of multi-stakeholder approach, right, Juan?
Yeah, I do think that it's a combination. I like the fact that UN is number one there in many ways. We want to make sure that we have countries looking at this from a common framework and common understanding. But I do think, especially public-private coalitions, and governments working together, I think it's important to have that dialogue, basically. So,
go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say that the United Nations is one of probably the most trusted institution nowadays, despite the noise. And I think this is what it reflects. But the UN doesn't set rules, and I don't think that the member states that conform the United Nations, that are 193 countries, are looking at it from the regulatory approach, but more on cooperating around AI governance. And I think this nuance is important, because it's not from a constraining and limiting perspective, but it's more of a cooperative and synergistic and
helping to have that dialogue, helping to basically try to understand where we have differences.
And respecting national sovereignty and trying to have interoperability between the different approaches.
All right, well, before we go, we have only a couple of minutes left, but let's end on a note of optimism. We'll start with you, Caitlin. In this moment where we're talking about technology's ability to make our lives better, essentially, what are you optimistic about?
The fact that we are only just at the very, very tip of the iceberg, and that people are so excited about it, that we have, in just a very short time, 500 million people using AI, which I think is huge in just the past few years. And and that we have not yet even begun to dream of where it's going to take us.
Juan?
So if we look at the history of, sometimes it's difficult to understand how much progress we have made as a human race. And if we look at the metrics like infant mortality, people living under the level of poverty, majority of the metrics have been improving over time. And majority of that improvement has been driven by technology, particularly by general purpose technologies. I do hope that we will continue the trend. And I do think AI, when you look at the list of SDGs, AI is clearly aligned and clearly, I think, potentially in all of these. So I hope that this will help us continue making that human progress.
Lucia?
Yeah, I'd say it democratizes access to information and knowledge in a way that it raises the bar for everyone, and everyone can be a better performer or be a better professional. And to me, that's very important because it's an equalizer in a way. Obviously, you need to take into account what's behind the technology and the information that is shared, but it's a very powerful tool to uplift people.
Yeah, I think for me, I study international relations, and so oftentimes we do have this more pessimistic view of AI and international conflict, but the beauty about a general purpose technology is there's so many different applications, and so I think something we underrate is just as something as very simple as translation. And that's one of the earliest use cases of AI. That's one of the things that drove a lot of the developments in AI. And so if we really have amazing translation services and someone grows up in Accra, Ghana, able to read literature from all different languages so much more easily and there's more accessibility to that, I think that does something good to the world, right? And translation from an international relations perspective can also reduce misunderstanding and misperceptions, which are key drivers for conflict. So I think that there's a lot of hope in this area too.
All right, well, hopefully that's all true. There's probably a little bit of cause for concern as well, right? But nice to end on a positive note, and that's going to do it for us today as we come to you from inside the United Nations headquarters. Of course, I want to thank Jeff and Juan and Lucia and Caitlin, and of course, thanks to all of you for watching. As a reminder, you can see all of our content from our Global Stage series at gzeromedia.com/global stage. I'm Tony Maciulis, and for all of us at GZERO and Global Stage, have a great day.